Hi students, this is lesson 2 for our cultural anthropology class. We are going to use some terms in lesson 2 or investigate some concepts that were defined for you in chapter 1, but carry over. They're really foundational concepts that you need to understand in this first introductory cultural anthropology class, and they're really good for all of your other social science classes also, whether it's sociology or religious studies or gender studies or any of those kinds of social science or liberal arts and humanities kinds of classes. So these two concepts are major parts of what we have to think about from here on out as we investigate specific topics in our class, because they're kind of like underlying philosophical concepts that we need to be aware of because they affect the way we analyze, the way we perceive, or maybe even judge people around the world who have differing habits, differing beliefs and traditions and customs from one culture to the next. Because culture, as we defined it in the first unit, culture, put simply, is the way in which human beings interact with their environment to survive day to day, and then also add meaning in their lives. So the survival from day to day is talking about the basic needs that we have as animals. We have some basic needs that are not instincts, they're just needs like food and water, and we need shelter in a lot of cases. Not all of us need great big huge coats and parkas or whatever to shield us from the cold outside because we don't live in a cold climate, or not all of us need, a very sturdy shelter. Maybe we can have just like a thatched roof or something, because the climate is okay with that, and that's all that we need, for sufficient shelter. But those are the kinds of things that we need to survive from day to day. But the ways in which we go about getting or defining what is edible and what isn't, or how do we gather or collect our water, and do we use it for drinking or irrigation, or any of these different kinds of things that we're going to use or the water for, and what types of shelter do we have. All of these things are determined primarily by the environment that we live in, but also the knowledge that's passed from one generation to the next, and that's where we get the meaning in culture. So the definition in general, again, is the way we interact with our environment. We, human beings, interact with our environments to get what we need to survive from day to day, and also add meaning and fullness and richness to life. So culture is different from place to place. Even within the United States, just going from the northern states to the southern states, there are differences in culture, differences in attitudes about how to prepare foods, or the accent that we speak with when we're speaking English, for instance. So there are differences that you can notice even within large geographic regions that call themselves one culture. We call ourselves American culture, but there are differences there. Well, when you go all the way across the world to different places that have completely different religious belief systems or different geography, so the same foods that we are accustomed to here are not readily available there, so they have a different definition of what is or isn't edible. Those kinds of things can cause us to question or judge or misunderstand the relevance or the importance or the human rights of people around the world. Okay, so these two concepts that I'm going to talk about, they both have very positive sides to them. They both have very negative sides to them. They're kind of opposites, though. The first one is ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism is a key concept in our class because we need to be aware that ethnocentrism affects our thought processes every day of our lives. Ethnocentrism is the tendency that all humans have to judge other people's ways of life and habits and traditions by our own way of life and habits and traditions. So it's the tendency to judge another group's culture using our own culture as the standard or the measuring tool. This is a tendency that all humans have. We're not born with this tendency, so I'm not going to call it a natural inclination. No, we learn our culture from the moment that we enter our social group. We start to learn our culture, and that's most of the time well before we have a memory. We're capable of having a memory of, the sunrises and the sunsets that go about through our early years. So we start to learn our culture so early in life that some of us might say certain things come naturally to us, but we learned almost everything. We have a reflexive need to blink or to breathe or we have hunger, so we need to eat. We have certain kinds of things that, yes, everybody everywhere does, but the ways in which we do them differ from one place to the next, or the ways in which we fulfill like what it is we're going to eat, and how it is that we prepare it, for instance, have different kinds of habits and customs and traditions worldwide. So ethnocentrism is the tendency for us to make judgments about other people's ways of life based on using our own as the standard of goodness or the standard of completeness or the standard of righteousness or something. Our way must be right, and a way that differs from ours is not. And this is not just a United States thing. This is a human tendency everywhere. So we need to be aware of this in cultural anthropology class, because we're going to study a lot of different types. We're going to kind of survey and skip across the top of a whole bunch of different types of cultures worldwide and look at really different ways of doing things from one nation to the next. And you're going to have some times in class, as I still do, none of us ever kind of get away from ethnocentrism, but you're going to have some times when you are really going to judge other people and say things like, you're wrong for doing certain things, or you should stop doing this and do that instead, or you should believe in this religious tradition instead of the one that you have. All of those kinds of reactions and thoughts that might go through our head, those are ethnocentric thoughts. Don't feel bad about yourself when you have them. You're going to have them all the time. But when you do have them, the educated person has to step back for just a second and ask themselves, and is this, am I being negative in my judgments? Am I limiting people's individuality? Am I limiting people's rights? Am I limiting people's privileges based on some kind of cultural difference that they have with me or with a dominant group or something? Am I oppressing people because I think that you are not doing certain things right because I do it this other way? So this is the negative side of ethnocentrism. If someone or a group of people or a country full of people have enough muscle to force another group to change, then ethnocentrism can be a really dangerous thing. Ethnocentrism can be the cause of religious wars. Ethnocentrism can be the cause of genocide. Ethnocentrism can be the cause of holocausts, like what happened in Cambodia in the 1970s and 80s. All of those kinds of tragedies where people fight and disagree with each other and try to force, one power tries to force another group to follow a different way of life, all of those conflicts are caused by ethnocentrism. So ethnocentrism can be an extremely negative thing if we don't realize that it's there and hold it in check. On the flip side, ethnocentrism has positive sides too, has positive effects too. Loyalty is a characteristic that probably most of us in our culture hold, we have a lot of approval. We approve of people who have loyalty as one of their personality characteristics. Whether it's brand loyalty or loyalty to your best friend or fidelity in marriage or any of these kinds of things, the push the motivation to be loyal and to have fidelity in relationships, this is founded in ethnocentric feelings. Like we want to have this, purity or this trust between people. So even team spirit, for instance, if you have a favorite a soccer team or a tennis player or any of these kinds of things, your high school football team or something, if you have team spirit or you really have a strong fan relationship with a celebrity or something, these kinds of feelings are founded in ethnocentric tendencies. Loyalty to your faith or, devout belief in a religious faith is founded in the belief that your faith is correct, it is right, it's the proper way, like many faiths teach us to believe. These kinds of feelings are the positive side of ethnocentrism. Patriotism for a country is the positive side of ethnocentrism. So it has a positive side, but we have to keep both the positive and the negative in check and kind of, stay on an even playing field so that we don't go to one extreme or the other. Because if you take it to an extreme, the negative side, you can cause devastating consequences. And if you take it to the other side, you might still have a tendency to force your way on other people or judge people harshly based on your way of life, which is what ethnocentrism is all about. So ethnocentrism is a tendency that all human beings have. You are going to have ethnocentrism several different times, if you haven't already, in this class as we study different cultures. So that's one of the major concepts from Chapter 1 that we haven't talked about yet. The second major concept from Chapter 1 is called cultural relativism. Cultural relativism. When we say that something is relative to a situation, it's particular. It applies to a particular situation, and you can't apply it if you look at a different situation from that point of view. So cultural relativism is an evaluation technique. It's a way of analyzing or understanding other cultures from the point of view of someone in that culture. What is the history, the common history that the population has shared? What is the geography that that population has grown up in? What are the traditions? What are the belief systems? What's the economic structure like? What are all the cultural factors that are specific to that group? And when you try to understand life from the point of view of somebody who has lived the history, who has grown up in the location, who follows that belief system, who has that economic exchange system in their background. When you understand something or try to understand a situation from the point of view of somebody in that situation, that is cultural relativism. Cultural relativism includes the concept of being tolerant of others, not judgmental, not using your own way of life and your own cultural standards as a measuring tool to apply to other people's way of life. Cultural relativism does not do that at all, does not approve of doing that. It says that you have to understand a society from the point of view of somebody who is in that society. Okay, so like ethnocentrism, cultural relativism has a positive side and a negative side. But actually first, before I go into that, let me say that I mentioned with ethnocentrism that it's not a natural tendency, but it's kind of an automatic thing that if we don't realize, we jump to judgment. We have a tendency to jump to judgment. If we don't realize that, then we're kind of not aware of what ethnocentrism is. Cultural relativism, on the other side, is not an automatic thing. We have to train ourselves to use cultural relativism. We have to be aware of ethnocentrism, like we just learned about, and be able to notice it in ourselves. And then cultural relativism is something that you, as an intelligent person, me as an intelligent person, we have to try to guard against ethnocentrism by training ourselves to use cultural relativism instead. Okay, so now let's talk about the positive side and the negative side. So we mentioned that cultures are different everywhere. And you hear a lot in our society these days, in pop culture, in our society these days, that tolerance of others and tolerance of diversity, we hear the word diversity, that's like celebrating the differences among all of us. So diversity and tolerance of differences, these are kinds of things that are celebrated in our culture today. And they are really part of cultural relativism. The better you practice at using cultural relativism, the more tolerant, understanding, patient you become, and the better you're able to overcome your ethnocentric tendencies. However, and so that's a positive thing. It's like tolerance of others, acceptance of others, right? That's viewed usually as a very, very positive thing. People have a right to individuality. People have a right to be the way that they are, and cultural relativism helps us be able to say, you have the right to be the way you are, and I don't have the right to force you to change just because I think you're wrong about something. So that's the good thing that that cultural relativism helps us do. The flip side, however, what if a culture limited a person, a human being's ability to be an individual, to live their life fully, to have the entire length of a lifespan that's possible, or to enjoy daily life because, or like you and I enjoy daily life. What if the cultural habits and practices oppressed certain individuals within that culture? Oppressed or even damaged physically and emotionally people in that particular culture, but that's just their tradition. Well, that's just their custom. Well, that's just their way of life. But from an outsider's perspective, you're limiting different humans, selected humans within that society. You're limiting their ability to be fully human and fully participating in society. So there's a lot of different examples that I could go with to highlight or to illustrate this. And the one that I'm going to go with in this case is a process called female circumcision, which is a practice that is still very common in the world today. Circumcision is not exactly a topic that anyone discusses very often unless it's particularly, your human rights focus. But circumcision is something that certainly in the United States, we're not unfamiliar with it, but we usually assume that it's males that we're talking about when we say the word circumcision. Some of you right now might be thinking to yourselves, wait a minute, with male circumcision, you're thinking about the process. Okay, so you have foreskin on the penis, and the idea is that this foreskin could possibly make it difficult to keep clean, or maybe have infections or whatever, and so it's just more sanitary, maybe, you're saying to yourself, or maybe there's a religious belief system that you follow that says that circumcision absolutely should happen for certain religious customs. But at any rate, circumcision itself is not uncommon at all in this country. But to put the adjective in front of it, female circumcision, this might be the very first time that most of you are hearing about this. So just like there's extra skin around a male genitalia, there is extra skin, and in some cultures' points of view, there's extra skin around a female's private parts also. And so female circumcision removes some or all of the skin around a female's private parts um, for a variety of reasons. For instance, there is a short video that I'm going to assign for you to watch. It's from a documentary from the BBC, and you're not going to see anything graphic, nothing at all, and you won't really even hear anything described that's too graphic, but there is, excuse me, there's an anthropologist from Ireland, I think, and she's with a group of people from Ethiopia. The name of the group that she spent some time with is called Afar, A-F-A-R, the Afar people from Ethiopia. Thousands and thousands of years of history in Ethiopia these folks have, and lots of long-standing customs and traditions and beliefs and heritage in that area. So it's just ripe for cultural relativism because we have so many references and knowledge, so much knowledge from thousands of years of these people being in this region. So this anthropologist is sitting around and she's just talking to some other women who are sitting around with her, and they start talking about childbirth, and accidentally she learns about female circumcision, and she didn't seek to learn. She didn't formulate questions or anything ahead of time to go and talk to these people and learn about female circumcision, but it just comes up in conversation because they start to talk about childbirth and how complicated childbirth can be because they're circumcised. So she starts to ask some questions. What do you do? How does it happen? Why do you do it? And she discovers some answers to these questions from the point of view of people in her culture. So at the end of the video, you see her addressing the camera like I'm addressing my camera right now, and talking directly to the viewer, and she says, what can I do about this? I think it's terrible, she says. I'm paraphrasing, but she says, I think it's terrible. But what can I do? They don't, can just one person make a change and, help people not suffer the way that they do? Because people lose their lives, people bleed to death, they have secondary infections, and they have no ability to enjoy sexual intercourse at all for the rest of their lives after, in this particular case, in the Afar region where they practice female circumcision, they take off almost all of the excess skin and then sew up what's left so that the urethra, where you urinate, and the vagina, where menstrual blood exits, they sew it up so that there's only one exit for both of those fluids to come out, so infections can happen. Scar tissue is a terrible problem. There's some special needs during childbirth that may or may not work, and sometimes you can lose the mother or you lose the child. And they talk about that a tiny bit in this short video that you're going to watch. But this is their way of life, their culture, their habits, their traditions, their beliefs. Cultural relativism says that they should have a right to do that. Ethnocentrism is probably what's firing like crazy right now in your minds. And some of you maybe are even Googling this concept right now. And if you are Googling this concept, you probably will find more references, instead of references to female circumcision as I have described it, you will probably find references to something called FGM, female genital mutilation. Because most people use very judgmental words. Those are judgmental words. I am not telling you that those are wrong words, and because they're judgmental, you should not use them. But I want to point out that even the words that we use to describe something can illustrate our ethnocentric tendencies. So, female genital mutilation is an accurate description in a lot of cases. A lot of people say that's an accurate description of what goes on, and that it shouldn't happen because of the loss of life, because of the loss of physical pleasure, because of the loss of full human experience that it brings about. But it's women, for the most part, doing this to and for each other based on sex norms that are in the society, gender roles and expectations that are in the society. And that goes right on up with cultural relativism, that we don't need, we don't need to use somebody else's culture as the standard. We need to use their own culture as the standard of, of understanding and being tolerant. So, in other words, cultural relativism has a negative side also. Because how do you define a concept like human rights when you say that a culture has a right to be the way they are in all circumstances? Because in this circumstance, this extremely difficult concept to wrap our brains around and to think about and to make ourselves aware of, this extremely difficult concept to think about is part of the lifetime expectation in a lot of cultures. So should we just like turn a blind eye and just say, you just go ahead and do that, that's just fine? Or do we have an obligation to speak up for people who are powerless and damaged and oppressed, and any of the other words you can think of right now? Do we have an obligation to speak up for their human rights? Is it a human right to be able to have, a natural childbirth without the potential loss of too much blood because of ripping, or because of the scar tissue that doesn't heal back, or the baby's trapped or something and you lose the mother and the baby, or or not enjoying sexual intercourse? Is just being able to enjoy sexual intercourse a basic human right? You tell me. You can do some research for your reaction paper this time around and try to be as objective as you possibly can and see whether there are people who say, okay, well, female circumcision is a way of life for certain people and they have a right to it, or female genital mutilation is barbaric and it's oppressive and it's, whatever, tons of complaints and critiques that you'll find online. But can you find one particular definition of human rights that can apply to everybody everywhere, so that one culture is not imposing a definition of human rights that we came up with, we're going to impose it on you? That's got ethnocentrism written all over it. But where is the line? Is there a line? I mean, is there a clean-cut line where you can say, okay, ethnocentrism stops here, cultural relativism picks up there, and we go, and there's like a good balance, and we're happy with it? There's not a clean-cut line. Not at all. And so it is our jobs as professionals, it's our jobs as thinking, reasoning human beings to educate ourselves as much as possible to be aware of the role of ethnocentrism and the role of cultural relativism in our stations in life, whatever job you have chosen in your life, whatever career field you're working on. You are going to have situations in which cultural relativism is really going to help you understand a situation, cope through it, and get a job done that the person beside you is not able to deal with because they have not developed their critical thinking skills and awareness to the same degree that you have. You are going to have opportunities from, if you're a culinary student, to a welding student, to a philosophy PhD candidate, you are going to have opportunities in life to catch yourself in very ethnocentric situations where you're being very ethnocentric about a situation. You're going to be able to catch yourself and you're going to be like, wait a minute, is my ethnocentrism blinding me to something right now that could make this situation easier or could solve a problem in a more efficient or effective way? So these two concepts while they're extremely important for cultural anthropology specifically, for our class and the way we're going to look at and investigate topics in our class, they are extremely important just to live a full and well-balanced and happy, more understanding-filled life in general, regardless of what your degree choice is or your career path is. So, these two concepts that are introduced very briefly in chapter 1 are major themes that carry through this entire class. These particular two concepts are going to be highlighted and assessed in the first project that we do together this semester. There are 6 projects that we're going to do together, and the first and the second one also, when we do memes later on in the semester, there will be some cultural relativism and some ethnocentrism topics that you're going to be able to work on. But for our first project that we're going to do, we're going to do a comparison of a couple cultures around the world, and we're going to look at components of culture that are highlighted in chapter 2, have you pick out some components of culture from videos or a reading assignment or whichever one you're assigned to look at, and you're going to be asked to evaluate, whether something has elements of ethnocentrism in it, whether something has elements of cultural relativism in it, is there a balance, how could one point of view be improved, that kind of thing. So while your reaction paper and your quiz over this kind of information is more just basic knowledge level, demonstrating to me that you have a basic knowledge of the words that have been coming out of my mouth and the assignment that you have to read, the projects are going to take it above that knowledge and comprehension level, and you're going to be asked to evaluate situations, to analyze certain things, because that's what college is all about. We have some higher order thinking skills that we're going to use, not just, multiple choice, pick a definition, matching, fill in the blank, not just that. Life is about success in life, fullness in life is about understanding, making informed connections, and being able to come to a conclusion about situations with confidence in your knowledge and your abilities. So we're going to practice that kind of thing. You're going to be asked to practice that kind of thought process in the projects that we do in class. So please rerun this video, at least to the parts where I gave you the particular definitions of cultural relativism and ethnocentrism. Make sure you take good notes on not just the definition, but what are the positive sides and what are the negative sides of both. And see if you can figure out how do they counteract each other. Would you call them complete opposites, or would you just call them kind of adjacent to each other, or whatever your word choice would be? Look at them from the concept level. How do they relate? How do they differ? But also think about them in terms of extremely controversial issues like the one I hit you in the face with today. Female circumcision, which is a kind of culturally relativistic way of wording it, or female genital mutilation, which is kind of an ethnocentric way of wording it. But is it okay to be ethnocentric about that kind of thing that really severely limits human rights and life experience? You tell me. It would be a great reaction paper topic, and it's the kind of conclusion I'm going to ask you to come to in Project 1. So watch the other short videos, the female circumcision one that I've asked you to watch in this unit. Watch that one, please. And make sure you do that before you do your reaction paper and your quiz. And you've got my number, so text me with questions. Bye for now.